Hello, students. Welcome to yet another class in Savoring the Classics. So today we will be looking at the module where we have short stories, and the very first short story, Kabuliwala by Rabindranath Tagore. I'm sure we are all familiar with Rabindranath Tagore, but before we actually move into the plot, let's have a look at Tagore. He's a Bengali poet and was born in 1861 and lived through until 1941. And he was known as the Bard of Bengal. He was not only a writer, but he was also a lyricist, a playwright, and also a composer. And he was the first Indian to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature. And interestingly, he's not only the first Indian, but rather the first non-European to get this award. And he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1913 for his work, Geetanjali. And Geetanjali is one of the best works of Tagore. And I'm sure some of you would have learned poems under this work during your school days as well. And as you're all familiar with, he is the man who wrote our national anthem. So now let's go into the plot. So here what you can see on screen is a very short summary of the story Kabuliwala. So I'll read a bit and then I'll give you the explanation. So once upon a time, there lived a writer with his wife and his little 5-year-old daughter named Minnie. Minnie was a bubbly little girl and kept chattering every now and then. She loved asking questions and would jump to the next one without a break. She was very inquisitive and charmed everyone with her chit-chats and smiles. So as we begin the story, we know that there is a writer who is narrating the story, and he is busy writing a novel. And we have a 5-year-old girl named Minnie. And it is said that she was so bubbly, she kept on chattering, and she would always want to know one thing or the other. She was so inquisitive. And because of this nature, her father enjoyed being with her. And her father would be very patient enough to answer all her questions as well. Unlike her mother, who would get a bit angry with her inquisitive questions, her father adored her chats, and their conversations would end up quite lively, as I've already mentioned. Her mother would, be a bit irritated with her questions, but her father was so fond of these questions, and they would have these conversations which would turn out to be quite lively. So as we move forward, we see that the writer is engaged with his novel, and Minnie ran into the room and said that the doorkeeper Ramdayal didn't know how to pronounce the word crow. So this was something new to her, and she was so excited that she runs into her father's room and tells him that Ramdayal doesn't even know how to pronounce a word. So before the writer or her father could give an answer regarding the languages or how each of them spoke differently, she would not even wait for the answer, but rather would jump into another topic or another set of questions. But this time, her father was a little busy with his novel, and he asked her to go and play with Bola. So while she was playing near the window, she saw a man along the road selling dry fruits. And this is the Kabuliwala. Exactly what we see in the title. Now, there is a name for the Kabuliwala. His name is Rahmat. And he was a dry fruit seller who sold dry fruits. He had a big cloth bag, and you could see almonds and pistachios and several other dry fruits in this cloth bag. And he would go from one house to another and sell these dry fruits. As soon as Minnie saw him, she called out, "Oh, Kabuliwala! Oh, Kabuliwala!" The man stopped and looked at little Minnie. But suddenly, you see that, there is some kind of a fear in Minnie. Because Bola used to keep telling her, or even her mother would tell her, do not talk to strangers, and especially such people who would come by with a big bag. They would kidnap children, and this was the fear that she had. Overcome by this terror, she ran to her father's study. The Kabuliwala walked towards their door. And initially, the writer was a little bit annoyed because he was unable to finish his work. But yet, he went to the door, he spoke to the man, he bought some dry fruits from him. But before the Kabuliwala could leave the house, he wanted to know where the little girl was, because it is this little girl who called out, "Oh, Kabuliwala, oh, Kabuliwala." And he wanted to really see or meet this little girl. The father called out to his little girl, and you know what? Minnie was hiding behind the door, peeping at Kabuliwala and her father. And as we've already mentioned, Minnie was scared to go near the Kabuliwala because she thought that he would be one of the kidnappers and his bag contains other children just like her. She was so scared of these stories that she heard from her mother and Bola. But her father was very kind enough and patient enough and called out Minnie and said, "You needn't worry. This is Kabuliwala, a dry fruit seller." And now she was very comfortable and she comes forward. Surprisingly, very soon they become friends. One morning, as the father was about to go out, he saw Minnie and Kabuliwala talking and having fun together. And just like her father, Minnie had someone else, a very patient listener, just like her father. And very soon, the Kabuliwala was able to gain the trust of Minnie with a few little dry fruits every day. The narrator asked the Kabuliwala why he kept giving her the dry fruits and also paying him. But the Kabuliwala was reluctant in taking the money as he gave Minnie those dry fruits. Because Kabuliwala gave these fruits to this little kid out of love and not for the purpose of business. And even if you can read the textbook, you can see that at one point of time, he gives these little coins that her father gives to Kabuliwala to Minnie. Minnie takes it to her mother, and her mother is so furious and wanted to know where she got these coins from. And she says it is the Kabuliwala who gave it to her. Again, the mother would ask her as to why she took these coins from him. So again, coming back to the story. Over the next few days, what we see in the story is that the Kabuliwala and Minnie becomes the best of friends. He would come by every day and sit and talk to Minnie. They would have small conversations and share jokes that Minnie was so excited to be with Kabuliwala and always looked forward for his coming. And if you can also look into the text, they would share stories and they would have fun together. And a very common thing that they would share was when Kabuliwala comes to her, she asks him, "What's in your sack, O Kabuliwala?" And Rahmat or the Kabuliwala would say, "It is a hathi, it's an elephant." And they would again laugh. And then another routine exchange whenever they met was Kabuliwala would say, "You should never go to the in-laws." And especially Bengali girls were very commonly familiar with this term, in-laws, because they would send their daughters to their in-laws at a very tender age. But this particular family was quite modern. And therefore, Minnie did not really know as to what in-laws meant. And so she would ask in return, "Will you go to your in-laws?" And then he would say, "Yes, I would go with my in-laws." And again, they would laugh out loud. So that is what you can see here as to in-laws' house, where it is again used as a euphemism for jail at a later point in the story. However, Minnie's mother was very unhappy about this regular visits, as she feared the Kabuliwala, especially since he was a stranger and Minnie was also growing up. She was worried about this new stranger at home and always warned Minnie and also her father to beware of him. So you can see that, several days pass by. Minnie's mother is very scared, but her father is very comfortable with this Kabuliwala, where they also share some conversations. He would ask him as to how Kabul is and about his journey and so on. So one morning, as Minnie's father was busy working on his novel, he heard a loud uproar of the crowd from the street. When he looked outside, he saw the Kabuliwala in handcuffs, accompanied by 2 policemen and surrounded by a few people. He rushed outside to find out why the Kabuliwala was in the police custody. And that is when he realized that every year, in January or February, he would go back to his home country, to Kabul, before which he would collect the money that he should have received from people for all that he's been selling until then. So since it was time for him to go, he came to one of the houses to collect the money. But one of the neighbors said that there was a guy who was indebted to Kabuliwala for a Rampuri shawl. But that man, he denies the debt. And thus, there is an argument that breaks out. And Rahmat, or the Kabuliwala, he takes out his knife and he stabs him. And that is the reason as to why he is handcuffed. Without knowing any of these commotion, Mini comes running and he calls out to Rahmat, very casually. Their usual exchanges did not take place this time. And Mini asked him whether he was going to his in-laws' house. A very casual exchange that they've been having. And he says, yes, that's exactly where I'm going. I would have beaten up the in-law. But what can I do? My hands are tied up. This time, the answer did not amuse Mini unlike the other days. Rahmat was sent to jail for many years. Mini was indeed sad for not seeing Rahmat for many days, but being a little girl, she very soon forgets Rahmat and she slowly has other companions. Years passed. So we come to the fag end of the story. Mini grew up into a beautiful young girl and she was ready for her marriage. The wedding preparations were going quite smooth. And as usual, you can see Mini's father sitting in his study. But this time, he is noting the accounts for the marriage of his daughter Mini. Soon, a tall man comes to his study and says a hello. The writer at first could not recognize this tall man. But very soon he realized that the tall man was none other than Rahmat, or the Kabuliwala himself. And he realizes that the Kabuliwala was released from the jail just the day before. Realizing that there is a criminal right in front of him, and especially on this auspicious day, Mini's father was in a fix. For the first time, he wished Rahmat would leave the house very soon before the guest would see him. Mini's father told Rahmat that this day was very important and a wedding was to happen on that day and that everyone is busy and he would not be able to see anyone in the house. But before he could leave, he pleaded and asked if he could see Mini for a moment. Because Kabuliwala still feels that Mini is still the same old little bubbly girl. And when the father repeatedly says that today is not the day, he hands over a bag to the writer and says, please pass this on to Mini. And also said, I too have a daughter just like Mini back home. And whenever I see her, I'm reminded of my own daughter. And that is why I come to see her every day. And then he takes a paper from within his shirt and lays it in front of the writer. This paper has a very small impression of a little hand created with burnt charcoal, which was daubed on the palm. This little hand was his daughter's, who would always want to think of his daughter even when he's away from his home. And therefore this piece of paper was very close to his heart. And Minnie reminded him of his own daughter back in Kabul. Suddenly, Minnie's father understands the plight of a father who also has a daughter just like him. He calls in for Minnie. She is no longer the small child or the friend of the Kabuliwala. And when he sees Minnie, he asks her, "Are you going to your in-laws?" Now this time, Minnie understood the meaning of this question, because she was really going to her in-laws. And it is at this moment that Minnie recognizes that it is her old Kabuliwala. Soon after she leaves from the room, the Kabuliwala slouches on the floor with a long, deep sigh. That is when he recognizes that his own daughter must have grown up in those 8 years. The writer, the father of Minnie, was shaken and could understand the pain of this father. He cuts a few items from the wedding budget and he gives that money. He hands over that money to Rahmat to return home to his daughter. And he says, this would be the best blessing for Minnie at her wedding. And this is how we end the story. I hope you are familiar with the plot. Let's have a look at the characters. Rahmat, or the Kabuliwala, the main character of this story. In fact, the story is titled after this character, Kabuliwala. He is a very tall and shabbily clothed Afghan street vendor with a turban on his head, a bag over his shoulder, and a few boxes of dry grapes. So we see that this Kabuliwala comes to Minnie's house every other day in order to have a very casual and an entertaining conversation, or to have fun with little Minnie. And Minnie is a 5-year-old little girl who is the narrator's daughter. So we see Minnie as a 5-year-old little girl and even Minnie as a bride. And then we have Minnie's father, who is very compassionate, who is very patient, who is patient enough to listen to Minnie and her chit-chats. They do have conversations. And it's exactly this similar feeling or relationship that Minnie shares with Rahmat. And Minnie's father is also fond of Rahmat, and they also have conversations together. Minnie's mother, on the other hand, is a very timid person who is always suspicious of Kabuliwala because she was worried about the society that they lived in, because she believed that it was a place full of thieves and robbers and drunkards and snakes and tigers and malaria and soldiers. Because after living so many years in this world, she is still fearful of such stories around her. And that is the reason as to why she is not free of suspicion with Kabuliwala either. And we also have minor characters like the policeman who is taking Rahmat to the station or to put him in jail. And we also have certain other neighbors, a few neighbors here and there, where they come together when the Kabuliwala is arrested. So these are the characters whom we see in this short story. Now, what are the major themes that we see here? The very first theme that we come across is the filial love. Now, what is filial love? It talks about a father's love to his children. Now, we can see two fathers out here. One is the narrator himself, or the writer, who shares a very close bond with his little daughter, Minnie. They have fun together. They love to share jokes. They have conversations. And the father is so fond of little Minnie that he finds time for him. We also have another father here who is full of love to his daughter. And you see that this father, or the Kabuliwala, cannot even play with his own daughter because he is away with his job and he has left his family in Afghan. But yet, the little dog palm in charcoal is what we see at the end of the story, which shows the immense love that he has towards his child. And it is this little hands which is close to his heart that he reminds himself of his daughter. And it is this love that he has to his little daughter that he showers on to Minnie. Because just by looking at Minnie, just by having fun together and having conversations with Minnie, he is reminded of his own daughter. So this is the love that these two fathers have for their child. We also see a theme of human relationship. If you look at the status of the both of them, the writer, who is definitely on a higher rank as when compared to the Kabuliwala, but yet the writer is humane, who is able to understand another human being without putting any connections to the caste or the status that they belong to. He could only see him as a human being. And it is that bond that they share. And it is that bond which is shared or which is given to Minnie as well. And that is the reason even Minnie can form a very good relationship with the Kabuliwala. So you can see that there is a human relationship with the father and the daughter, with the father, the narrator, and the Kabuliwala and Minnie as well. And The last one that you see here is the friendship and the trust that Minnie and Kabuliwala has. They share a very strong friendship, and it is this friendship, or there is a whole lot of trust between the both of them. And the father also has a whole amount of trust towards Kabuliwala, and that is the reason as to why Kabuliwala is free to come home every day in order to play with, or in order to share jokes with little Minnie. So it's the human love in total as to what you see here in this particular story. It reminds each one of us as to how we need to consider our own neighbors, our own friends, people around us. Do we have trust? Do we share a good friendship? Is there a bond between people? Or do we go by the status? Do we go by the caste or the color? This is not what Tagore is telling us. It is love beyond all of it, and especially the filial love that is seen in this particular story. I hope you've understood the story, and please read the text again so that you will have a better understanding of this particular story. So the themes that we see here are the filial love, the human relationship between people, the friendship and the trust that they have between each other. Thank you.